welcome to Dave's Guide to IT. Today we've got an interview with DevOps Manager Susan Crampton, where we talk about a lot of different subjects, but mainly focused on what it is being part of a DevOps team, the different roles, the kind of things that we look for when we're doing interviews for that kind of role. It is my first time doing one of these. Huge thanks to Susan for doing this. It was not scripted at all. It's just a live. We grabbed a meeting room. We had the chance during lunchtime, and we just went for it. It's a little bit rambling on my side. My interview skills definitely need a bit of work, but hopefully you'll bear with me. I think we got into some good stuff, especially towards the end. And it starts and ends a little bit abruptly, but please bear with me for that one. And we'll hopefully improve in the future. But this is something which I want to do a few more of these series of interviews with people in various different roles within IT to give a good insight into what kind of different roles there are, the kind of things that we look for, what the jobs entail, really. So if this is something you do want to see more of, please do drop a like, hit that subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you again. Cheers. Who you are, what your position is, and we'll take it from there.
My name is Susan Crampton. I am the DevOps manager in our channels area of digital business services. Digital business services for stats is just IT everywhere else. Channels for us is things coming into the organization and things leaving the organization. So my teams look after web and all of our web components, primarily the infrastructure side of it, so code-based but not content. And for things coming into the organization, a lot of the systems that our field collections officers use in getting survey respondents back, questionnaires from businesses, different bits of information we also get from other government agencies, so like IRD, MOJ, Ministry of Justice.
Cool. So what kind of team makeup do you have in terms of staff?
So I currently have a team of 10 where we run as a DevOps model, so everyone does everything more or less. But we're responsible for both development of new systems, onboarding of third-party systems and integration, but also the ongoing maintenance, running of those systems, and also the whole life cycle of those products with our business counterparts. The team is made up of system engineers, so infrastructure, what we're calling analyst developers. Right. So developers, but they have more of a focus on not only knowing the tech, but also doing their own testing, not just beyond unit testing, of actually understanding the requirements of the business and how we can best meet their needs. Mm-hmm. And what we call experience assurance engineers. Yep.
Sorry, I struggle with that one, and I've got them in my team as well. But I still struggle with the new titles.
So previously they were closer to a traditional testing role, but for us it's more of a combination of tester and BA. So they're not only expected to be able to do testing, primarily some manual, but a lot of automated more and more. They are also expected to be able to work with the business and come alongside, fulfilling that BA function about not only do what you want, but doing requirements elicitation of what you need.
Cool. So when you're looking for replacing people in the team or expanding the team, what kind of things is it that you really look for when you're interviewing and writing a job advert for that matter? Obviously you've got a couple of different roles, so it's going to vary depending on the roles. Yep. But just a general thing, the kind of stuff that really stands out for you when you're looking for new people?
Getting people with technical capability is the easy part. It's finding someone with the fit and the attitude is usually the harder part, and it's those soft skills. Because you interface with the business, you need to be able to speak English, not tech. Mm-hmm. To be able to be understood and get to have that engagement, that level of personability, but also be able to work with your team members and your direct team members, but also the wider group. So a lot of what we look for is around attitude and drive. So people who go out and seek new opportunities, people who read more widely, even if it's, you may not work in cloud computing at this stage, but you know what it is, you know where the trends are, you're actually across a large, of what's going on in the wider IT space.
Yeah.
Also probably some of the more business space is increasingly what we're looking for.
Okay. So do you think that's something that's changed a lot over the last few years? I mean, it used to be kind of that, obviously my side of it is more the service delivery, and that's always been more of the soft skills, customer service. Traditionally, again, the DevOps model is fairly new, but that infrastructure, that tier 2, tier 3 technical resources, they were always much more of it is just a technical specialist role. I don't think there was quite so much in the social skills or the soft skills.
No, it probably hasn't been as emphasized now, because you're more multifaceted people who can talk to the business directly, that don't need an intermediary VA or someone to translate, very complex issues into what does this mean for a business user?
Yeah.
That, and also willing to do more and different things. That it's not my job. It is not an acceptable attitude in the current workplace. Yes, you may have only touched X briefly, but most organizations, especially large large ones and with piles of legacy, there's going to be a lot of stuff that is that legacy that the SME in those areas may have left the application hasn't been looked at in a large period of time.
Yeah.
It's being willing to look at those curly questions and do that investigation, not just expect it to be written in a manual.
Cool. Yeah, so and again, it is something that's changed a lot just in like the last few years. The IT and the technical teams didn't engage with the business at all. Having a completely separate unit that was the business relationship managers, that they were there purely because you didn't have a technical team talk directly to the business unit. And those business relationship managers were out in the business for the most part, but they sat with the business, they talked to them about what their needs and requirements were, and then their whole job was to bring that back and then try and translate it into requirements for a technical team. So that it's something that's changed a lot more, and it being more of a requirements gathering as well is quite important in terms of being able to translate that business need into how can technology enable your requirement, and that kind of translating those needs. Is that something that's come across a lot?
Oh, all the time. A lot of what you have a business unit that often, either they think they know what they want, that that they've seen some neat tool that somebody else is using, but not understanding how does that interface with all of the other things that are an environment. Because we are government, sort of what our obligations are that may be different than a private organization or a startup or smaller firms. Much higher emphasis on security as well. But having those conversations with business that the ideal is getting in at the start of an idea of of what it is, what is the goal they're trying to fulfill, how you will enable it, but also raising the questions with them are the things that they never think about. Not never, but often not. Around security, the integrity, kind of how, what's the life cycle of this thing? Who's going to access it? How are you going to manage that? And often what you sometimes find is it's very specific to a person or a team and their skill sets and thinking enterprise of, okay, well, assuming, okay, person X leaves the organization. Well, what happens then? Because you're so reliant on that particular set of skills. And being able to manage that change ongoing, find that those kind of conversations change how you approach development.
Right.
That you're not relying on business will do X, sort of as 2 years down the line, restructures happen. Mostly, again, just not necessarily in a bad way, but more that just people change roles, they upskill, they move on. Organization of which teams do what, even in the business end changes, of being able to adapt and have processes that are consistent. That means that you aren't chasing your tail in a year's time.
So I mean, the pace of change throughout both the business and technology in the last few years.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've had some specific stats stuff, but I mean, industry-wide, it's been amazing just in 5 years. Stuff that was something standard now that wasn't even an option.
Whereas, things that my team are looking at now for a couple of applications is serverless architecture. And, it's probably bleeding edge as far as government is concerned. I realize, private sector, it's probably been a bit more easily adopted. But that means you're also moving at pace of how you bring old legacy systems into that serverless space while retaining the security and compliance that that are required. But it does require staff to be a bit more on their toes, inquisitive, and ask questions. Of actually not, it's kind of back to what we were talking about before with the soft skills you hire for is that inquisitive nature.
Yeah, it's having the using your subject matter experience to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
Especially dealing with the business and the non-technical stuff to try and draw out those. Look, how do you actually use it day to day? Not, I want to use product X because they use it and that sounds good. How do you use it? What are the features that are important here? And then is there something else that we have already in the system possibly which can do the same kind of functions for you? It might not be the same software, but it might do all the same requirements.
There's probably one, I'm just thinking of some of our recent hires, the skill sets that they've had is being able to see opportunities and vocalize that. It's not just, doing work as assigned, it's hey, we're doing this and this is the end goal, but if we did X and Y, it would solve this potential problem or mitigate, these things. And sometimes, again, it's managing that. It's not just running off with every cool idea that everyone has, but it's having those discussions and also more that not waiting, managers in a DevOps environment are not subject matter area experts themselves. And so it's not I want to do this, what do you think? I'm not a system engineer. I don't know if that's a good idea or bad idea. What do your colleagues think? Of actually using those peer networks in ways, so it's not just your relationship with your manager, but it's your relationship across, your domain. So
like building those community of practice stuff.
Yeah. Which, again, we have going in some areas more than others. But that's sort of best of breed. You get some of the cross-skilling and learning, but it's the skills to engage with that.
Right.
And sort of bring those ideas to the forum.
Cool.
And not just wait to be told.
So, done a lot of the soft skills and those kind of hard to teaching bits.
Yeah.
Is there, training-wise, any kind of specific, it could be a course of certificates or a technical thing, is there any one or two things you think that are either really important right now or going to be important going into the future that, it's, even if it's not something which is necessarily the must-have for the role, it's one of those things where if they have it, that's a nice, you always like to see that on a CV, or is there anything like that?
Probably at this stage, again, a lot of the recent grads are coming in with the Azure skills, the cloud-based ones. It's more security and knowing how you embed that into practice from the start rather than an afterthought. that certainly has been a highlight on CVs, that you understand security principles.
So that's all the certification and accreditation side of things?
Those certificates, I mean, that proves that you can take a test and you can memorize material. I think there is something to be said for practical experience as well. And it doesn't need to be, necessarily that you've worked in X for so many years, but it's how have you applied it to, your side projects? Generally students will run, have their apps and their own projects, but how are you applying those security skills to your projects? And that's probably the bigger win in my books. Proving you pass the test, yes. It's definitely, I don't want to dismiss those, but it's how have you applied it? How do you know it's working? So it's also some of the, not necessarily the paid, job experience, but more those where, again, being government, one that you're actually investing in your own learning. That it's not necessarily the role of the employer to teach you everything and that you need to know on the job.
And again, I mean, from my personal bit, I think that's something which has changed a lot over the last few years, because it was very much the manager sends the team on a course.
Yeah.
It's everyone's going to go and do Azure with Microsoft course. There you go. It's a 3-day course. Off you go.
Yeah.
I think we're moving a lot more to having the individual conversations, because again, as part of the DevOps team especially, you guys have got a much broader spectrum of things that you're working on and that you're covering. You've got different roles, you've got different responsibilities. So, one course that fits the whole team is fairly rare nowadays. You're going to have kind of this person's a specialist in this area, this person's a specialist over here. There are some general core kind of, everyone needs to know about how to work with Azure DevOps board, because that's what you use.
Share technologies, but
but those technical specialists, you're always going to have people who are specialised in, one or two things that everyone else might know a bit of, but not quite at the same level.
I think it's also being able to learn on the job or figure out what you need to know to do a task and actually devote the time, even if it's, not saying your manager not to, nights and weekends, but so when we're working in a new space that we've had minimal experience or only a couple people have, it's more, okay, well, spend some time, do a Coursera, Pluralsight, one of those, not necessarily, paid, expensive subscriptions for these are relatively within the means of most developers, either through the organization or even independently, of learn about Terraform or this particular application within the Microsoft universe, or this third-party thing that you've never heard of before in your life because it's a stat-specific thing. Of learning how to learn on the job to pick up new stuff, but not being afraid. Again, it does. Often you do find those who have come through a more formal education experience tend to be probably a little more adept of, of knowing the core principles involved and then how to leverage it. But that, it's not, exclusive.
No, I think it's behavioural. It's that passion for ongoing learning.
Yeah.
And it's coming from the individual rather than the manager saying, okay, you need to go on training now, and this is what you need to do. It's having somebody who, I look at when one of my guys comes and goes, look, I think we really need to be looking at whatever the new thing. It might work, it might not, but I'm really interested in learning more about it. Here's some courses that are available, with different training sessions or Microsoft or whoever. It's great as a manager when someone comes to you with this stuff, rather than me having to look up stuff and go, because again, I'm a generalist even more so than yourself, at least you've got a background in doing actual specific technical. I am a pure generalist in terms of yeah, I can do a bit of this, bit of that. I'm a specialist in nothing. I really rely on my guys a lot in terms of identifying stuff that's going to be of good value for them. Uh, you need that, I think, a lot more nowadays. Self-directed and just that drive to actually. It's easy to coast. It's easy to go, oh yeah, I know this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know this niche technology. I'm the only one that knows it. I'm set. Again, pace of change is going to get it every time on that one.
Yeah, and I think also it also limits your own development. That, you know, if you were the guy that only knows X, particularly some of our legacy apps, that means actually everything becomes you. You don't get the opportunity to move on into new things because there's such a heavy reliance on you as this expert. Government departments, so there is a lot of legacy, but what we try to do is vary the workload in terms of, yes, I am going to ask you to look after this, dinosaur, but I'm gonna, we're gonna combine it with here's some cutting edge work too. So it's not so that the carrot of being able to look after some, to look into the new things means that you actually share the knowledge of the old stuff. And also that, new brands, may only have, it's that depth. So it's not just cloud. I do need them to be able to, know .NET, which, I know that, a lot of the codeless architectures and such are coming around, and a lot of configuration is, it's more configuration than coding, if it is. So it's probably the purists who just want to develop, probably don't find it a comfortable environment anymore. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to grow, you've got to stretch yourself to a point. And that applies not just to technology, but pretty much anything really. You kind of got to step outside the comfort zone at least a little bit every now and then, otherwise it's very easy to stagnate. As you say, with a legacy system, that can be, it's great for job security right up until it isn't.
Yeah, then the system, the systems are going to leave, and it's probably not going to be an upgrade path. So, are you interested in what the next thing coming down the?
Yeah.
Because I think that's limiting, your growth as an individual, but also I personally find that hard that you have job satisfaction doing that kind of role. The other thing about that is also being willing to take risks, but also to have self-awareness. I think is a large part of, one thing that I'm kind of thinking about, or that we're looking for in interviewees is, do they understand themselves and their own limitations and foibles? It's, great, candidates who said they can do everything, and they're brilliant at everything. They're human, that ain't true. So it's being able to say, I'm really good at these things, these are the areas I need, help in. Or they already need to have more work. More as a manager, it gives you confidence of that, what confidence and trust that, do they know their own limits, or will they, in order to get a job done, kind of barrel through it without kind of managing that risks and knowing, okay, well, I did, this, I need to get it peer reviewed. Taking on peer review comments.
I mean, that can be something which is quite intimidating to put it out there and go, look, especially if you're a new person coming into a team or coming into an organisation and you haven't built up those relationships with people to be able to go out and go, look, here's the work that I've done.
Yeah.
Give me feedback. So I mean, I think that taking feedback and adapting it as well is, taking it in a constructive way and not getting upset by it, and also being able to draw out what it is that you want in terms of feedback. The stuff that you don't know, or where you might need a technical specialist from another area of going, look, I think that's how that bit integrates, but I'm not. Is that
Yeah, it's again, hubris of, if often when we go out with a job ad, it's, here is the 3 or 4 absolutely non-negotiable key skills I want in this role. And here's about 5 or 6 others that are my nice to haves. And yes, once you get past the non-negotiables, then it's those secondary ones. And usually that's where you kind of get into a lot of the technical questions on an interview are, kind of, do you know your own limitations? So we've kind of worked out a bit in terms of pushing those questions, being, what, put things that you said claim on your resume, you will be asked about them. Tell me how you implemented blah, and you said you did it here. And the answer is that, oh, well, I just followed the instructions. Or I listened to the,
it's whether they've actually been driving something or designing it themselves as opposed to following somebody else's lead in terms of,
And if it's following lead, that's absolutely fine, but it's being honest about it.
Yeah.
And it's that transparency that I think is probably where I've seen a lot of interviews go very wrong, claiming knowledge or a depth of understanding that isn't there. Being able to say, I don't know, is actually a huge win in my book in an interview. Granted, back to those core skills that you're saying I don't know there, we have a problem, but there's others. If you kind of get down to a level of detail and you're going, I think this, but I don't know, it tells me that they have the self-awareness, but also a, self-awareness, another word I'm looking for, but I'm not finding it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because interviews and interview questions, everyone's got their own interview questions that are the ones that I always ask that one or some variation of that question. But there's a lot where I think pretty much everyone asks stuff that's in some way actually going to be, tell us about areas for self-development for you. So it's looking at that. 1, they're aware of any weak spots. And 2, specifically related to the job that they've applied for. Do they understand the job that they've applied for?
Yeah.
And are they self-aware enough to go that, just like you said before, oh yeah, I know this parts and these parts of the jobs that you've put in the advert, I can 100% I can do that. These are the specific examples of me doing stuff specifically for that.
Yep.
These other bits you've mentioned I'm not quite sure about, and that's the areas where I need help. I think if you get that kind of answer in an interview, it's always one of those. It's a little smile just to be a little bit, just trying to control the.
I think the other one that we're looking for now that I can say 5 years ago I didn't look for was emphasis on customer. Even I don't care how if you're a DBA down in the depths of an organization where you don't slide pizza under the door, it's understanding. Are you interested in your customer? Do you have not claiming complete understanding of, but it's that it's a consideration. So in an interview, it's not that it's in the question of how do you respond to customer demand or something more. Those, I can't imagine that we're special or different in this respect, but that is a consideration in your answers.
Yeah.
That I did this, responding to a customer who wanted X. And again, it's more around natural behaviors of, what are your thought processes? Customer and risk are probably the 2 things that you listen out for, especially in those very vague behavioral questions about, tell me about a time that.
Yeah. You're looking for those star responses. And they know what star responses are?
That's, I have to say probably developers are less good at star responses. That's probably takeaway number 1, which again, it's not always a bad thing, but it's more, do you know why the question is being asked?
Yeah.
What is the interviewer trying to glean from this? Usually it's 1, that you have a technical understanding of the environment you work in, but more, you are situationally aware. Stakeholders, of risks, of customers, of, it's often not just the technical, that's important too, but it's that combination of.
At the start of all my interviews, I have a bit of a boilerplate, the introduction and the spiel and stuff, kept in confidence and all that kind of thing. But something I always put in is, even if it's an internal candidate, treat us as if you don't know us. And try to give us specific examples of when something happened, what you did, what the kind of things you were looking at, what was driving the decisions that you made. And it's amazing how many people, you'll ask a question and it'll be, oh yeah, and then I did the thing. And everyone was happy. I've got follow-up questions.
Yeah.
But it really is, if without prompting, if someone comes in and the candidates that really tend to blow you away are those ones that come in and, they bat off and say, oh yeah, well, I wasn't quite sure what I needed for this, so I talked to the business unit, or I talked to the person that was, the end consumer, the person that this is going to be used by. How are they going to use it? What kind of stuff do they actually, what requirements do they want, and how is it going to be used? All that kind of stuff. And I think that's, with specifics, I think that's always one of those really important ones to get.
That's true. I'm thinking of a few of those successful interviews where it's when it's very light on detail. Partially because it does one, if it's an answer I could give, then I kind of do question of not necessarily truthfulness is quite it, but the veracity of it all, that did they understand the situation they were in, why have you picked this example, and I fully accept that in an interview your mind goes blank and but once it's probably in terms of that preparation of thinking about sort of the star moments you had in the office, and one of my standard questions is kind of give us that what's been the highlight of your career? What do you consider your biggest professional success? And probably, even if it's not that question being asked, it's probably a good one to have in mind of, what examples would I pick where I shined. The other one I've found recently is also again, because we are working in DevOps and in team cultures, is being able to separate the I from the we, and knowing what your role in a project was versus what your team accomplished.
Right.
And I possibly maybe a cute tall poppy thing, where the excessive uses of the word we, like, okay, that's great, and team player, but what was your contribution? I've heard that one a few more times in recent hirings, and usually the follow-up question is, right, great, what was your role in this? What was your contribution? And it's not about being a show-off necessarily, but it's how you contribute.
We need to get a feel of the person, how they work, and the kind of things that they're thinking about. Mm-hmm. Are they considering the right stuff? Are they making good decisions based on information, or they happen to get lucky with that example? It worked out for them, but it is a genuine thing. Sometimes you get you get an answer to stuff, and you go, from what you gave me, the outcome was great.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much of that was you just got really lucky because you just went, oh, yeah, that'll do, and it worked out for you. Mm-hmm. Or how much was it deliberate? No, that was what I intended to do. This is what I set out to do at the start. I gathered my requirements, I talked to people, and I achieved what I wanted to go and do.
I also don't mind examples of failure, of more that I tried this, I did X and Y and Z, and at the end of the day, the client wasn't very happy with the project because a whole bunch of other things changed. It doesn't mean that the thought process and the work that you did was irrelevant